Alright, so we're continuing chapter 3 in the Tanya. The Tanya, for many of you, is going to be a very deep book, perhaps a little bit complex and challenging, because it presents many ideas that you've never come across. Nonetheless, it is a very important book to learn. One who becomes familiar with the main chapters in this book will have a totally different perspective about life. And this is an important perspective that every Jew should have, because it will help him understand what his main purpose in life is, how to go about achieving his greatest potential. And that greatest potential is a connection, a strong connection with the Almighty. How to avoid the pitfalls that affect all of mankind throughout the history of civilization. People have failed. And it's a shame, because every human being has great potential, Jew or non-Jew. Just that not everyone is directed. Not everybody wants to be directed. And this book is a tremendous favor, because it offers a very concise but very clear guide in how to deal with the challenges in life successfully. And in order to do so, what is needed more than anything else is knowledge. And as Francis Bacon, you may have heard, used to say in Latin, "Nam et ipsa scientia potestas est." Knowledge is power. If you have knowledge, you can accomplish a lot. Obviously, even with knowledge, it may not be enough. It depends how it is applied. But there's no doubt about it. In Judaism, there is strong emphasis about becoming knowledgeable. Knowledgeable not necessarily about the world, but in the ways of Hashem, in what He expects of us. The rabbis tell us in Pirkei Avot, for example, "En bur yerei chet v'lo am haaretz chasid." A bur is an unrefined person. He's totally not knowledgeable, but he's also unrefined. His character is very raw. He doesn't make any effort to refine himself. So such a bur, such an individual, cannot become truly a God-fearing individual. He's missing some very important tools to be God-fearing. V'lo am haaretz chasid. Am haaretz is an individual who's not knowledgeable, who's not very learned. He cannot be a very pious Chasid individual. In order to become Yirei Chet, in order to become God-fearing and pious, which are tremendous achievements and high levels, lofty levels in spirituality, one needs knowledge. One needs the tools in how to develop those positive qualities. What I decided to do with chapter 3 is to give you a little bit of an introduction about the importance of this knowledge and how it could help us. Because chapter 3 is very important. It gives us an idea of how we can miss out if we don't know the basics. The basics have to do with the potential that the neshama, the nefesh Eloki, the divine spirit in us has. As long as you direct it properly. And when you direct it properly, the goal will be that it develops a love and a fear for Hashem. And this may come as a surprise to you, but there are many knowledgeable people out there, knowledgeable, intelligent individuals who don't fear God, don't have a love for God, don't even believe that God exists. And we need to understand why. So this chapter briefly touches on that. But, as I've said before, many of the concepts are further elaborated later on in the book. So that's why I decided that, and from time to time I will do so, is to give an introduction, to elaborate a little bit more on certain concepts that I feel that are necessary. They will help us greatly understand what his message is. There's another pasuk in Mishlei that says similar to what our rabbis tell us in Pirkei Avot, "Gam belo da'at nefesh lo tov." Even without knowledge, a nefesh can be no good, a spirit can be no good, a spirit can be lacking so much. Below that, Because you may think otherwise. You may think, well, he can be innocent, tamim, naive, and it's okay. No, he's missing out a lot. Not only is he missing out a lot, it's lo tov. It is not good for him to not know what his responsibilities are in this world. One of the first obstacles that human beings have without having any knowledge of what's right and what's wrong, or what they should pursue, is that their focus is in themselves. And that is normal, because we all have what's called a nefesh behemi. We have an animal spirit. And that animal spirit is important for the human being to survive, for the animal to survive. We need to have a certain drive to do certain things, to take care of ourselves. The problem is that with the nefesh behemi by itself, that's all that will remain, is a focus in one's own personal achievement, happiness and satisfaction. Nothing wrong with that by itself, but that's not what we're here for. Life is very short. We're here for a short, very short visit, even though it sounds like many years, 70 years, 80 years. Before you know it, it's over. So what happens is when an individual does not possess the divine knowledge that he can acquire, that he can pursue, Jew or non-Jew, if he does not possess that information, then he will never be able to maximize his potential. Because if all that will happen will be a focus on his own personal achievement, his own selfish interest, that is so far away from his true potential of what he can do and what he can contribute to this world, to humanity as a whole. Just think of it. If one wants to have a relationship with another individual, a loving relationship, a close relationship that requires concern, love, how is he ever going to develop that if his entire focus is in himself? The older a person is, before he gets married, the more difficult it is for him to share his life with others. He's gotten used to taking care of himself. The younger he or she is, it's a little bit easier. There's no guarantee that he or she will want to share. Because what we're talking about is to love another individual, not to love yourself. That requires a whole different direction, a different focus. Because naturally, the focus is for the human being to take care of himself. So who's going to teach him? Or what's going to bring it out of him to want to desire, to have an interest in someone else? And let's take this one step further. What will make him want to have a relationship with someone he does not see, with Hashem? So it's not so easy. The kelim, the tools that are necessary for this, involve a certain knowledge, a certain awareness about Hashem, about a purpose in life. Without that, it's very easy to become distracted. It's very easy to lose oneself. In this world that is fascinating, that is full of entertainment and distractions, it's very easy to forget. After all, we all want to earn a living. We all want to live a comfortable life. We want to be happy. Nothing wrong with that. But let's not forget that that's not the ikar. That's not the most important thing in life. There's something more important, more valuable, much more precious than anything else, and that is the relationship with Him. But how do you convince someone of that? How do you convince a man to love his wife, or a woman to love her husband, to be devoted? Why? Why should they? What's the significance of this? Without the proper tools, it's much more difficult. Once you equip an individual with a certain awareness, then it becomes easier for them to be more sensitive towards these ideas. Otherwise, if you tell somebody in Russia, especially if he's a communist, that you have to love and that you have to take care of someone perhaps these ideas are foreign to them, depending on how they were taught, depending on what philosophy they're following. Just using Russia as an example, because of how they were indoctrinated to believe a certain way, it becomes more difficult for them to change their view, their perspective. But this could be with anyone. Obviously, this book is geared more towards the Jew, but a lot of its lessons apply to everyone, to all of humanity. We're dealing with the necessary tools to be able to focus properly. In dealing with love and fear of Hashem, I might as well say it now, even though we'll eventually cover it more in detail. There are various levels. On the more basic level, people may love someone, including Hashem, because of some future reward. We're all familiar with the principle in Judaism called reward and punishment, sachar va'onesh. Yes, some people are afraid to commit a sin. Some people will perform a good deed because of what they anticipate. Reward and punishment. That is very low level. I always like to use the example of someone who does not speed on the freeway. Why would someone not want to speed? You're going to get faster to your destination, hopefully, if you make it safely. Why not speed? So somebody will tell you, well, I don't want to get a ticket. It's a very expensive ticket. That's low level. Low level fear, low level respect, because of the ticket. That's the only thing that's holding him back. Otherwise, he would speed. So if we tell him there's no highway patrol, he may just go ahead and speed. The next level is, I don't want to speed because it's dangerous. The speed limit signs are there for a reason. Don't go beyond 65 because it becomes more dangerous to control your car if you have to stop, if you have to make a turn. And these things happen. Makes some sense. But that's not the highest level of observing the law. What's the highest level of observing the law? I don't want to speed because that's the law. And I respect the law, regardless of the reasons, regardless of any compensation. It's not because of the fear of the ticket or so. It is because this is the law. When it comes to love and fear of Hashem, the same applies. There are those who are afraid to commit a sin, those who would want to do something right because they want to be compensated for it, rewarded for it. And there are those who do it because Hashem said so. Their love for God, their fear of God is so great, it's so intense. They're not thinking about compensation here. They're not thinking about the punishment. How could I do this against God if He's been so kind to me? If He's so great? And the same thing with a relationship. We spoke about it last week when a man cheats on his wife. If he knows it causes her pain and he still does it, that means he doesn't love her. It's not a complete, pure love. How could you do something that you know in advance will bring her pain? So there are different levels in fear and love of Hashem. And what we're going to learn today is what brings about those levels. Or perhaps we can call them what brings about those, or that type of awareness. Because it's all about awareness, a certain awareness that enables an individual to connect with a certain idea, either in a weak way or in a very intense way. So what is it that makes him aware? The Rambam says, Maimonides says, that in order to become aware, in order to become sensitized to God, it's not enough that one knows about it, that he was taught about it. He needs to actually ponder it from time to time. To go outside from time to time and look at the Milky Way, if it's dark enough. In many cities you cannot see it. Go out to the desert, go to the forest, go to the mountains, and ponder the creation. Look around. Look at the beauty of the design. Look at the vastness of the universe. Ponder the creation of Hashem. Same thing with the Sefer Chovat HaLevavot, if I recall correctly, he says the same thing. It's not enough to know that God exists. It's not enough that we were taught that this is a fact. Come to that conclusion on your own and strengthen your faith by pondering about it, by thinking about it from time to time. Go out and meditate. Go out and amaze yourself with all this creation. And you can do that, by the way, in the laboratory too. Look at under the microscope and you will be amazed what you see in the cell. There are various ways that one can achieve this, to see the greatness of Hashem, of His creation. So this is a step in the right direction. This facilitates this awareness that Hashem exists, and this can actually strengthen our faith and bring about a love and a fear for Hashem. So it could be there at a very low level, but if you want to strengthen it, if you want to bring it up to a higher level, then that is a very powerful tool. Titbonen babriya bigatlut Hashem. Look at the greatness of Hashem and ponder His creation. What actually brings about the various qualities in the human being, however, whether it's fear or love, are yesodot. Yesodot are elements, and we've spoken about it many times, that there is air, water, fire, and earth. Elements, physical elements, as well as spiritual elements in the nefesh, Elokim, the divine soul that we all have. And these bring about, depending on the element, they bring about certain midot, certain qualities, certain feelings. One can be ecstatic, excited. Where does that come from? One can be in awe, in admiration, fearful. These all come from Yesodot. Obviously there's something that triggers it. As the Rambam said, look at creation. Hopefully it will trigger it, but what ultimately brings it about are the Yesodot that we all have. We all consist of certain elements. And it's the element of fire, for example, that brings a certain level of awe, of fear of Hashem. It's the element of water that brings about certain emotions that lead to love. Take a look at, for example, at the emotion that produces tears. What are tears? Tears is like water. It's an intense feeling, an intense emotional feeling that is being expressed in such a powerful way that the water gushes out from our eyes. That is how I explain it. Otherwise, why are all these tears gushing out from the eyes? Obviously, we have a certain amount of liquid in us. And there are certain emotions that are expressed in such a way that they sometimes go overboard when they are very, very intense. Now, we've spoken about tears in the past. There's all kinds of tears. There's tears of disappointment and of sadness too. There's tears that are produced by the eyes because of the smoke. Then there are sweet tears, tears of happiness and joy. So they come from all sorts of sources in the body or in the soul. And there's different things that trigger them. Ahavat Hashem, at the highest level, when one is so intensely connected to Hashem, can produce this kind of tears, this kind of connection with Hashem. Then you have, as I said, the fire. This fire can be expressed as a tzimaon, a thirst to want to be close to Hashem, a certain anxiety, a certain longing. He longs, tzame'an nafshi, as the David HaMelech says, I thirst, my soul thirsts to be close to Hashem. From the fiery element that is being expressed in such a way. And the same applies to all the other midot, all the other characteristics that we all have and that we display from time to time, they will depend on a certain element. Now, in speaking about midot, qualities, don't forget that there are times when certain qualities can be expressed positively, and there are other times that they can be expressed in a negative way. Anger, for example, that's very fiery. And eventually the Baal Tanya, the author of this book, will explain what is that triggers that versus that. Why one over the other, when they're both apparently originating from the same element. In order for the Jew to be properly focused and to bring about positive expressions of all the good midot, of all the good qualities that are expected of him, Hashem gave us the Torah in the mitzvot. The mitzvot are not just a way for us to acquire merit and credit upstairs and later in the world to come. Rabbis tell us, Ratzah Kadosh Baruch Hu lezakot et Yisrael lefichach hirba lahem Torah mitzvot. Hashem wanted for us to be meritorious. That's the simple translation of the word lezakot. And He therefore gave us many commandments. You have many, and you have a greater reward. What is this compared to? Imagine two individuals came to the office. They were both working for this jeweler, and they're working on commission. And one individual got 2 stones, and the other individual got 50. Could you imagine the one that got 50 complaining? It's not fair, you gave me so much more work, so many more stones to carry around. What is the boss going to tell me? You're a fool. You can earn more than the other one. I only gave him 2. I gave you 50. Right? Some people have that attitude. They look at all the commandments. Wow, there's so much to do. You don't understand. Hashem wants you to be meritorious. He wants you to earn so much that He's given you all these mitzvot, all these opportunities to earn so much credit. So that is a simple meaning. But the word lezakot also means to purify, to refine our character, to make sure that we stay on track, that we stay properly focused. The mitzvot help us to be mezakech that nefesh, to purify that soul. As the Sefer HaChinuch writes, "Halevavot nimshachot achrei ha'perulot." The heart is influenced by the actions that we perform. We perform certain actions, and those actions influence our heart. Charity. The more you give, the more you help, the more it influences us in a positive way. It could be that an individual started off being somewhat stingy, but because he trained himself to perfect this mitzvah to its fullest by giving tzedakah on a regular basis, it's helped him overcome that weakness that he had from birth, that inclination. Whether it's laziness, whether it's stinginess, whether it's anger, regardless. We all have weaknesses, we all have inclinations. Through the mitzvot, we can overcome those inclinations or those weaknesses. So lezakot means to purify, to refine that character by way of the mitzvot. So yes, even though the human being can be somewhat selfish, naturally, thinking only of himself, it is possible, with the proper knowledge and awareness and tools, to transform him to become a better individual. He can maximize a great potential that he has as a result of the soul that he has. Remember, it's not just an animal. He has a soul, a divine spark. And by way of the mitzvot, whether he's Jewish or not, even the non-Jews have 7 Noachite laws, which I'll talk about soon, we can accomplish a lot. Because we're going to stay focused. What are we here for? To do His will, not our will. And what does He want us to do? This and that. And if we do so, those mitzvot will also have a positive result in transforming us into better people. Let me give you an example of a mitzvah that can transform one, but not just transform, but also act as a springboard to other positive qualities. The commentaries tell us that the mitzvah of kibud avayim, which is logical, to honor one's parents, it happens to be a logical commandment. It is intended to be a springboard to the love of Hashem. In other words, if you honor your parents, you will hopefully come to the realization, they take care of me, they feed me, they dress me, they do so much for me. They brought me into this world. I owe it to them. By thinking about it, by focusing on it, by doing our best to give them the proper kavod, this will help us focus on the love of Hashem. The more so I owe God for having brought me into this world, for providing for me, my livelihood, my health, everything, for giving me children. In other words, the mitzvah of kibud avayim, of honoring one's parents, helps. It is a springboard to enable us to relate to Hashem, to be able to connect to Hashem in a way which is not so easy because we don't see Him. Our parents we see, we're aware, we realize. So in order to be able to fulfill a more difficult mitzvah of ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, the springboard is kibud avayim, honor your parents. All right, if that's the case, I always had a very big question. How come Esav did not progress? Esav was known to be the best in the mitzvah of kibud avayim. Right? The honor that he gave his father, even the greatest rabbi said they didn't even reach his ankle. He was so much better than they were. He excelled in that mitzvah. Then why didn't that mitzvah take him one step further to love Hashem, to form a connection with Hashem? Good question, no? We just said that this is a springboard. The mitzvah of honoring one's parents should hopefully enable one to progress and show that love and respect for Hashem. Then how come Esav remained an evil individual, more into himself? The answer to this is perhaps in the following words of the Rambam, Maimonides. The Rambam says the non-Jewish world has 7 Noahide laws. That's all. And if they fulfill the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, and they do so because Hashem commanded, they have a chelik olam haba, they have a share to the world to come. They are the righteous of the nations. And there are individuals like that. Okay, that's very nice. But the Rambam was careful to add the words, and they did so because God commanded. Otherwise, if a non-Jew were to observe 7 Noahide laws, the 7 laws, but he did so because he thought they make sense to him, they're acceptable to him, not because Hashem commanded, then all he is a chacham. He's a good man, he's an intelligent man. But that does not guarantee him to share to the world to come. Why? He behaved himself. He did this, what he was expected to do. But he did so because he thought those 7 Noakalas make sense. They're acceptable to him. He can live with them. If he didn't do it because God commanded so, he lost out. Anybody want to suggest what is missing here? Just because he did it on his own, through his own mind? Apparently that detail, because Hashem commanded, makes a world of a difference. You know why it makes a world of a difference? Because if you don't have the relationship with Him, if you don't do something because He said so, you're not maximizing your potential of transforming yourself in being a real good person. If something is good for you, it makes sense to you, you'll do it. If it becomes difficult, will you still do it? If you don't have Hashem over you, if you don't have Hashem telling you to do so, that this is a commandment from above, then it's not the same. You won't be as moved, as motivated to do it. And it will not give you that power to want to get closer to Him, to progress, to take it one step further. Now you understand why Esav did not move, did not progress. He, of course, was mechabed av. Of course, he honored his father in a great way. But he didn't do so because Hashem told him so. He did so because he felt this is the right thing to do. For whatever reason. There are people like that. They feel that this is the right thing to do regardless. If there's no Hashem in their life, there's no Hashem commanding them to do it, there's no way that that beautiful quality or that mitzvah will enable them to progress to higher levels. There's nothing pushing them. There's nothing telling them, come on, grow, become closer to Hashem. A mitzvah by itself, if it's not connected to Hashem, does not have the same power as if it would be connected, because Hashem told me to do so. I'm doing this mitzvah because Hashem told me to do so. And that is why many times you will find L'Shem Yuchud Kudsha Berichu. You will find a whole introduction, a whole prayer to say, right before you perform the mitzvah, to enable us to focus. Why am I doing this? Because He asked me to do so. He commanded me to do so. It makes a big difference. It helps in the kavanah. Kavanah means to focus, to have the proper intent in doing so. What is missing, therefore, when one does not do it because Hashem said so, is something called da'at, which is what we're going to be talking about in the next few minutes. In chapter 3, he talks a little bit about chokhmah, binah, v'da'at, and he explains it later on a lot more. But da'at is something that is not well understood by a lot of people. Chokhmah is wisdom. Binah is understanding that which you've learned. And da'at is knowledge. But that's not the best translation for da'at. As we will see, da'at really means to be connected. To implement what you've learned, to make it a part of you. If you don't connect with it, if you don't identify with it, then you may have chokhmah and binah. You may have all this great knowledge that you've acquired. And now what? What are you going to do with all that? Do you know how many scientists have tremendous chokhmah and binah, understanding? They've analyzed the length and the width and the depth of everything. They know it very well. They're very familiar with the smallest details of the human body because of the powerful tools that they have today. Incredible, complex systems that they've seen in the human body, and still it does not encourage them in any way, for whatever reason, to become closer to Hashem. Why? Because there's no da'at. Once you understand this, it helps to follow chapter 3. In other words, it's possible to read the words, and even if you are familiar with the terms, it's better if I think it's better if we clarify how this da'at is so significant. Because chokhmah and binah is something that we can relate to, it's something that we understand. We deal with it on a regular basis. Chokhmah is the raw knowledge, and binah is taking that knowledge and further dissecting it and analyzing it. But now what? What are you going to do with it? That is powerful. That is implementing it, making it a part of you, living by it, identifying with it. It was taking the next step. There's a saying, taking the argument to wherever it leads. If this leads me to the belief in God, then I will do so. Don't be afraid if this is where it leads. For that, one needs that. Without that, all it is just plain chokhmah and binah. And it's not at its fullest potential. This is also very important when it comes to mitzvot. One who does a mitzvah, let's say he puts on tefillin, and he does not have the proper kavanah, he doesn't think about what he's doing. He's just tying his arm with straps, black straps, putting these boxes on his head. To an outsider, it may appear that he's taking his blood pressure. What are you doing? Putting on tefillin, Do you know what this means? Do you know what you're actually doing by putting on tefillin? Do you know what it says inside the tefillin, in those boxes? Which parchments, which chapters in the Torah? Do you know what it signifies? If he does not have kavanah, if he never learned, and even if he learned, but if he does not have the da'at, he does not connect it, and therefore is missing focus, then it's not effective. It's not as effective. There are certain mitzvot that are powerful even with not too much kavanah. Mezuzah, you put it on the doorpost, you kiss it, of course, when you go in and you go out, but it's there. Hopefully we have the right kavanah when we put it on, when we make a blessing, but it remains there. You fulfilled your obligation. A mitzvah that is done on a regular basis, a mitzvah that we do on our body, is very, very important that we have the proper kavanah at all times. Because otherwise it's not effective, it doesn't do too much for us. The mezuzah is a protection for the house, if it's a kosher mezuzah. You have to check it twice every 7 years to make sure it didn't become erased or the letters didn't crack. But otherwise it does what it does. We fulfill the mitzvah, plus it's a protection for the house. But what we do for ourselves, whether it's washing our hands in the morning, whether it's making a blessing, whether it's putting on tefillin, it makes a world of a difference if we have kavanah or we don't have kavanah, what it will do for us. One idea that we will see later on in the book is that there are certain elements out there, I guess we can call them elements, shemafreim lanu, that will hamper our job, that will make it difficult for us. In other words, even though we know what we need to do, and we have the intent, and we want to have the kavanah to do it, let's not forget, there will be trouble ahead. There will be those elements that will attempt to dissuade us from working so hard in having kavanot, in doing the right thing. And this is therefore an introduction of sorts to what he eventually is going to explain and elaborate a lot more later on in the book, that there is something called sitra achara that you cannot avoid. Here we're trying to do everything right, and we're going to use all the tools that he tells us. Don't forget, however, that you will have elements out there that will try to compete for your attention, that will try to interfere with what you're doing, with that which is holy, and they belong to the unholy camp. Here you want to be excited, here you want to connect to Hashem, you want to love, you want to pray intensely, fervently. No, it's not going to be easy because of those elements out there that belong to the impure side, the sitra achara, who will try very, very hard to get us to become disconnected from all this. And this is the trouble that we all have had throughout the generations, is staying focused at all times. It does happen that we can sometimes be focused for a few minutes, and that you should grab. The Baal Shem Tov used to say that from time to time the soul is awakened and it feels inspired and excited. Commit yourself right away to do something special at that moment, because you don't know if that moment is going to repeat itself so soon. From time to time they awaken us and we feel great, we feel good, we want to do something right. But it's not always like that. We wish it was like that, but it's just like a mood swings. Sometimes you're in a good mood, sometimes in a bad mood. How do you stay in a good mood all the time? It's not easy. Chasidut emphasizes simcha, be always happy. But even if they emphasize it, you think it's easy? No, it's very, very difficult. So we need to have the tools, that if you ever become a little sad, how do you get out of it? Because we need to get out of it, because if we don't get out of the sadness, we won't be able to do what is expected of us in the best way possible. Okay, so this was all an introduction. I'm just going to briefly go through chapter 3, the main highlights of what he says, but with this introduction, I think it will help us understand. He says like this: the various aspects of our soul, nefesh, ruach, and neshama, various levels or grades of the soul, are made up, or I would rather say are expressed through the 10 Sefirot. The 10 Sefirot, the 10 manifestations or emanations of Hashem. You know, Chokhmah, Binah, Vadat are the first 3, then you have 7 below. Now, what does it mean that they express themselves? So we need to remember that the 7 bottom Sefirot pertain to the Olam HaAsiyah, to this world, to the physical world. The other 3 are more spiritual. Nonetheless, every human being has a nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Every individual has these grades of the soul, the various levels of it. So these various levels of the soul have different ways of expressing themselves. If you lost me, just let me remind you what we said before. There's something called fear, there's something called love. These are expressions. There could be intellectual expressions and there could be emotional expressions. So think of the intellect and the emotions as modes of expression. So nefesh, ruach, and neshama have various expressions as they come down through the Sefirot, through the various emanations or manifestations of Hashem. We have these Sefirot divided into 2. We have the top 3, Chokhmah, Binah, Vadat. As I translated before, Chokhmah is wisdom, Binah is understanding, and Dat is knowledge. And then you have the other 7. I guess we can translate in English. We have Chesed as kindness, Gevurah as severity. Then you have Tiferet, beauty, Netzach, endurance, Hod, splendor, Yesod, foundation, and Malchut, royalty. These are the Sefirot. And in the same way that Hashem created the world with the Sefirot, and that is why the Sefirot correspond to the 7 days of the week, because each day of creation corresponded or a certain Sefirah is manifested in that particular day. The same is true with the soul. Various Sefirot manifest themselves or are expressed. I prefer the word expressed through an individual's action, whether it's from the intellect or from the emotions. So in the same way that the Sefirot are divided into 2, so is the human being. He has the intellect and the emotions, the regesh, divided into 2. Amongst the midot that the human being has as a result of this division are the potential of Ahavat Hashem and Yirat Hashem. Okay? In other words, this potential of love and fear of Hashem, where does it come from? It comes from these midot. From the various qualities that the human being has. Whereas the intellect is just Chokhmah Binah Vadat. But intellect alone is just to intellectualize, to understand something. It doesn't mean that you can express it or you're going to take any action. It's important to know, it's important to understand, but Judaism is about doing. Not just, I believe with my heart. A lot of people tell me, I'm a very good Jew at my heart. But you don't do anything. Judaism is about actions. You have to take certain actions. You got to do certain things. You can't just believe and feel. You got to do things. But there's a need for understanding what you're doing too, not just doing it. As we said before, if you don't understand, if you don't relate it to Hashem, something will be missing. So as you can see, there's a nice division here between the intellect and the emotions. How is it seen in the Sefirot, the love and the fear of Hashem? Chesed is Ahavat Hashem. Gevurah is Yirat Hashem. Gevurah is severity. Now what's interesting over here is that the Baal Tanya says that first you develop the fear of Hashem, and that will lead you to the love of Hashem. And it will be such a great, intense love, at kalot nefesh. In other words, your soul is consumed by it, in the fire of this love. If you look at other sources, including the Rambam himself, you will see that love comes before fear. Not the way he says it, fear comes before love. Why is it so? I think the best explanation is like this. We said before, remember, there's various levels of love and fear, depending on what your reason is. On the lowest level, love does come before fear. Love is at the basic level is the desire, the interest to get close to Hashem. I want to. It's called cheshek, the desire, the interest. That interest will lead to develop the right fear and awe of Hashem. And that awe and fear of Hashem will eventually lead to the highest form of love, which is the most intense form of love. Ahava shelo tluya b'davar, baseless love, an intense love that is not seen too much. But it can be arrived at when a person gives his life. When a Jew was asked from time to time to give his life for Hashem, he demonstrated a tremendous love, and that is why we say in the Shema Yisrael, "V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha v'chol modecha." Love Hashem with all your possessions, with all your heart, with all your soul. How? Afilu hu notel et nafshecha, even if he takes your soul. In other words, to die because of what you believe is a very, very high level. And throughout our history, we've had all kinds of situations where the Jews were tested, and many of them gave their life. They demonstrated tremendous love. In other words, that was more important than their physical existence. Not easy for anyone to do. Not easy for just anyone. Depending on what kind of a connection he's had throughout his life. What has he been doing throughout his life? You don't just give your life just like that. What was he like yesterday? You see what I mean? It's a build-up, but it's possible. People ask me, well, what about all those suicides that, kill people, suicide, terrorists? They also give their life. Mm-hmm. Is that the same? Of course not. That is to kill people. A lot of people are prepared to do that. To die, having in mind to kill others? That is not something so noble. That's selfish. Unselfish is to die yourself only for Hashem, not because you want to kill people. To die for what you believe, that you don't want to give in, that you're not doing it necessarily on your own. You're being forced to do something against your faith. There's no comparison. Of course, people will die. So did the kamikazes, the Japanese pilots. In World War II, they took their plane into the American ships. Yeah. That was their goal, to destroy. Right? Even though they were doing it for their country, but it was to destroy. It wasn't necessarily to give their life for a noble cause. So Ahavat Hashem at the highest level is, of course, when one is prepared to give his life. But it doesn't have to involve giving one's life. It could be demonstrated through one's commitment to the mitzvot in the highest level possible. So the Baal Tanya explains it in such a way that it is the fear of Hashem that leads to that kind of love. He hasn't really touched on the lower level fear, the lower level love, which is the basic of wanting, of wanting to have a connection with Hashem. That is at the very basic level. He goes on to explain that if we look at the Sefirot as a whole, the division of 3 on top and 7 in the bottom is as follows. The 3 on top are called the mothers. The 7 in the bottom are called kfulot. Sheva kfulot, shalosh imot. Why do they call those 3 above mothers? Because the 7 at the bottom originate from the mother. That's where they come from. Mothers is a term that's used to describe the origin, the source. The 7 that are kfulot is because you have a double. You have a right and a left as you go down the sefirot. But it's not just the mother. You will find that sometimes there's a term called Av, and sometimes there's a term called Ima. Av is the Chokhmah. Bina is the mother. And then you have Dat. Why is it so? Because Av is where the source or the first seed is planted. The father is the one who originates or brings about life. He's the first. But that Chokhmah at its origin is concealed. We don't see too much what this Chokhmah is all about. So he says that is why it's called Chokhmah. If you look at the word Chokhmah, the first 2 letters, Choch, turn it around, is Koach. Koach Ma. There's the potential here, but Ma, we don't know what it is until you get Bina. Bina analyzes this potential and further elucidates and makes it clearer to us. So Av and Ima. Why? Because Av originates, initiates, and then what happens? What happens in the mother's body? The fetus develops. So you have an idea that is very, very deep, concealed, unknown. That's Chokhmah, the father. It goes to Bina, where it further develops and is clarified, just like the fetus in a mother's womb develops. So this just helps us understand why these terms are used. But in the end he says, well, don't forget, you need Dat. Dat is what connects everything. Without that, you don't have anything. So Chokhmah and Bina are the ones that are responsible for bringing about Ahava and Yirat Hashem. Very important concept over here, because what did we start off saying? That if a person has no Dat, has no Chokhmah, he's not knowledgeable, he will never become a Yirei Het or a Chasid, a God-fearing individual. So Chokhmah and Bina are the tools that I mentioned earlier that we need to start with, because they are the ones that are responsible in bringing about Ahavat Hashem and Yirat Hashem. He does, however, say that there are various ways that one can analyze this Chokhmah. When it comes to Bina, you can go deeper and deeper and deeper. Obviously, everyone according to his abilities, but at the stage of Bina, it is when we begin to appreciate how extensive and how deep this Chokhmah is, if we looked at it from all directions. And what will we find when we look at the world from all directions? We will be impressed, he says, on how the light of Hashem, the eminence of the light of Hashem, fills everything and sustains life. If he would remove himself for 1 second, everything would cease to exist. And we see beyond that, we are able to see beyond that, that there's so much light that even this physical world cannot hold. But it's mekif, it surrounds. And if we look 1 step further, we will notice how small we are. How small is planet Earth compared to other planets? The bigger planets, even the sun, how small it is compared to other stars. And today we have the tools, other kind of tools, technological tools, to see and to observe all of this. So, observing the greatness of the universe, pondering the creation of Hashem, will bring about from the Chokhmah and Bina, the Ahava and Yirat Hashem. So you see why you need the Chokhmah and Bina. But it's not enough. But that is a start. To be able to see through the intellect and later to feel the greatness of Hashem. A lot of people just intellectualize things, but they don't necessarily feel it. He explains further that the Tzimaon, the thirst that we talked about before, to Hashem comes from the fire, and that particular fire, he says, is in the heart. That's where we express it. Whereas the water, the element of water, is in the moach. Another way of explaining this is that the intellect is cold. Cold intellect. Water. And the regesh is hot, because it's full of emotion. If a person were to only use his intellect to analyze everything, it's cold. Facts, but you can't do anything with it. You need emotions. You need to combine the two of them. To have just emotions without the intellect is also not so easy. What's going to trigger those emotions? So you see how the two have to work together. The element of fire and the element of water. All the other midot, however, he says, there are other midot, are branches of the love and the fear of Hashem. Just want to finish with dat, with the idea that we started off with. That dat is a connector. Dat is the one that sustains a certain idea. A person can become excited, a person can become knowledgeable about something, but he can forget. A lot of times we do things, but we stop after a while. There's no consistency. Dat connects. What's the power of dat? And he brings that is something so powerful that it is used to describe intimacy between Adam and Chava. Vayeda Adam et ishto, it says. When Adam was with Chava, what language did the Torah use that they were together? Vayeda, he knew her. So he says, you see, dat means to know. But it's not just knowledge, it's to be connected, to become one. What does it say about marriage in the beginning of Bereshit? Vayule basar echad, that they should become one flesh. To become one with Hashem, to become connected to Hashem, you need dat. It means to take the knowledge and to use one's emotions to express, of course, what we know, but to do it on a regular basis through dat. If a person does not do so on a regular basis, then eventually it falters, it weakens. It's just like a plug. It eventually falls off and the connection is gone. Yir'ah and Ahava are very, very powerful kochot, very powerful and important qualities that are necessary, not only as tools to have a relationship with Hashem, but to be able to transform us into what we could be. A person cannot be a greater individual, cannot be more saintly, more pious, without these qualities, without these midot of ahava and yirah. What should motivate him? What should be his incentive? In other words, he will not be able to grow. And that's such a shame. I sometimes imagine, you know what Albert Einstein could have been? The greatest rabbi. He was a brilliant mind. And he had chokhmah. And he had definitely had binah, but there was no dat. Now what? Now what? You see? That is what is so interesting about this perek, but it's sometimes forgotten, that there's a lot of emphasis on chokhmah and binah is because these bring about ahava and yirah. Yes, but don't forget it can only come about with dat. If you ponder the creation and you're amazed and impressed and excited, but you don't do something with that, then it's all going to cool off eventually. And the same thing with a husband and wife relationship. You always have to keep the kettle on a low flame. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're not going to have tea, right? You like tea, right? Yeah. You like it cold or hot? Hot. Then you want to continuously have your hot tea, then you have to leave it on a low flame. Husband and wife who were married for 30 years, do they have the same flame that they had when they were first married? Not really. They got used to each other. Unless they use their dat properly to do things to stimulate the relationship so it should not dry up. The more so with the kesher with Hashem. There's so many things that distracts us. And sometimes we think there's other more important things, but there is nothing more important than that. But what it takes is chokhmah, then it takes binah, but then it's the da'at that will complete the whole picture. That is what will give us the fortitude to be able to persist, to have that continuous desire, B'ezrat Hashem, to be always connected to Hashem. Amen.